Hey, welcome to the RWB podcast, second episode. Hey, I'm your host, Russ Blaise, and my co-host, Lance Zedric. How about it, Lance?
Hey, Russ. Glad to be back after a brief little break we took to kind of gather ourselves, do a little extra research, do some honeydew projects, and do all the things that we need to do when we're not doing this. So thanks for having me back.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you're the co-host, so you have to be back. I ain't doing this by myself.
All right. So what are we going to talk about today, Russ?
Today we're going to talk about the establishment of the Alamo Scout Training Center, how it was formed, what was the orders that came through. So basically there was a document. We'll put it up, show you what it looks like. And from there, the Alamo Scout Training Center was established, and also the Alamo Scouts. And what were they going to do for the rest of the war? So if you want to...
Sounds like fun.
Yeah. So you want to set us off on that? That'd be great.
Well, I hope everybody's ready to World War II nerd out a little bit on this. Well, when we left off last time, we were talking about General Kruger's forming of the Alamo Scouts through Order 353B, issued on 28 November 1943. And as Russ alluded to, we'll take a look at that, and so we can see the actual order. Once that happened, then it came down to finding a camp. So the Naval Amphibious Scouts were already established there on Kalo Village on Ferguson Island, just 20-minute boat ride off of Goodenough Island, where the 6th Army was headquartered. So with that being said, one of the first things when establishing a camp, you have to find a good CO. And in this case, the name was the Director of Training, and that was Frederick W. Bradshaw, who was chosen out of the 31st Division by Kruger himself. And he had gained Kruger's attention during the Louisiana maneuvers, where he did an outstanding job. And he hailed from Mississippi, and he was an attorney, and by all accounts, a brilliant man who was actually being considered as a post-war gubernatorial candidate for the state of Mississippi. So he was quite an accomplished man, and a lot of good stories about him. Never raised his voice, always said, "Let the rough side drag," whatever that meant. I'm still trying to figure that out.
But that really
was something he would always say. And so once Bradshaw was named, he had to have a good XO, and that would be Homer Red Williams, who was a career Army guy and kind of no nonsense. He got the nickname Red because that bright orange hair, and he was kind of the disciplinarian. And Red was the first to tell you that. And I had the opportunity to interview him a couple times in 1993, and he talked about kind of being a rule follower. He liked to make sure that discipline was tight, and Bradshaw was really about courtesy. He was about integrity and setting the stage for a unit based on truth. And the Alamo Scouts, many of them echoed that same sentiment. Let's be honest in our reporting. Let's be accurate. Let's be truthful. Let's be precise. All of the attention to detail saves lives. So to flourish, Kruger had to have a good man at the top, and I think he couldn't have made a better choice. Bradshaw was such a quality individual that, incidentally, in 2014, a contest was held in the Army to name the Special Operations Missions Training Center at Fort Bragg, and it is currently named Bradshaw Hall. And I had the pleasure of attending that with Jack Geiger for the dedication. It was an incredible.
Yeah, that was nice. Yeah.
Yes, and that really says a lot about Kruger's choice of Bradshaw and the integrity that he had and the brilliance. And there's a lot of examples of things that Bradshaw did really kind of make that show, but we'll try to give a few examples as we go through. But
and
that's really the skinny on him.
Yeah, the building you can't really. It's not open to the public,
That's correct.
That's correct. So you really can't go there. There are memorabilia in the actual building of Bradshaw's. So
yes, his granddaughter Constance Bradshaw, she donated some of her grandpa's his hat, his swagger stick, some other things, to put in a very nice case there in the lobby. Now, unfortunately, Bradshaw died of a heart attack at home in 1946 when he was only, I believe, 40 or 41 years old. Yeah. So lost much too soon.
Okay.
So where do we go from here, Russ?
Well, okay, let's talk about the Navy leaving the camp.
Okay.
The amphibious scouts decided to move on. So why did they actually move on? Do we know that answer?
Well, I think...
Were they disbanding in a sense? Was their time up?
I think there was... There's a lot of pieces to this puzzle, and one of them being, as Milton Beckworth talked about on our previous broadcast.
Yeah, episode 1.
That there was an inter-service rivalry. And this Navy and Naval Amphibious Scouts, that also contained an Army unit, or Army element, rather. So there was Beckworth and Gamble and Talco,
right,
who all became part of the Alamo Scouts staff. They never had to move their tent. They just stayed where they were at. So I think there was this conflict or competition between Kruger and naval brass. He was kind of angry after the Gazmata operation ended so horribly that it was supposed to be a few-day mission, and it ended up the guys narrowly starving to death on New Britain. So I think the nature of this inter-service group, the Amphibious Scouts at that time, there wasn't enough oil for the machine, so to speak. And I think they kind of became locked up under their own weight and trying to satisfy too many.
Yeah, it made it ripe for the Alamo Scouts to, be the elite unit in the Pacific, basically.
Absolutely, because you had the Marines and you had the Paramarines who were active, but hearkening back to this time, Russ, one has to understand there was a lot of I wouldn't say jealousy, but resistance among the Army brass and the Navy brass and the Marine brass to allow the best of their troops to be siphoned off into these so-called elite units. This was really a relatively new concept in World War II. You had the Jedburghs who were operational in Europe, the operational groups, OSS. You had Merrill's Marauders, who is a long-range surveillance unit that was basically used as infantry. You had the Rangers over in Europe. So you had some of these special elite-type units, naval combat demolition units, Naval Group China. You had some weird ones, too. The Alaska Scouts. There are 24 elite-type forces that one can look at when studying World War II and say, well, the Alamo Scouts were one of a few in the Pacific, but with the Pacific actually being on the back burner of the war, really.
Correct. So basically, they took over, the Alamo Scouts took over the Amphibious Scouts camp, and I guess they didn't want everything taken away so they can use it. So basically, Mayo Stunts, they selected him Give us a little rundown on Mayo Stunts.
Well, Mayo Stunts is quite the character, I must say, and a dear friend. We both knew him well, and without him, we might not be sitting here talking, Russ. Mayo Stunts was chosen as the supply officer for the first camp. And, Mayo was a retired CIA station chief. He was always a little close to the vest about some things.
Yeah, I remember asking, when we had dinner with him out, a restaurant down the block from his house that time. We were in D.C. area. And I said, so, I asked him a question, like, what part of the CIA were you in? And he says, there's two sides to it. There's the administrative side, and there's the dirty side. And I said, what side were you on? He goes, the dirty side.
Well, he was stationed in Japan after the war for a time. And one thing I never, and I know we digress, but you got to say this about Mayo. After he left the war as I believe a lieutenant colonel, he immediately went right into being the concierge or the greeter at some hotel in Washington, D.C. And I don't know about you, but that just doesn't match, somehow.
No.
I wonder how many people he was recruiting at that juncture in that hotel lobby.
Sure.
But who knows?
Who knows?
Who knows? That's just speculation. However, getting back to the Alamo Scouts, Mayo, God bless him, kept a diary, and he turned those diaries over to me when I began my research on the Scouts in 1992. And oh my gosh, talk about just a wonderful day-to-day notation of what was going on, along with some of his own thoughts, about missing home, like everybody writes in a diary. But then Mayo just, traded a bottle of whiskey for something today with the Navy out in the bay.
Yeah, it was a water tank.
Yeah, water tanks.
We'll play the video of that, him talking about that.
Oh, that's better than me describing it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah,
and Mayo had a great memory, and he had this knack for being able to. He was a good old boy from Virginia, and he could just Southern slide right in there, negotiate in a low-key way, and man, did it pay off for the Scouts.
Yeah, well, here's the video. We're going to play it.
All right, let's take a listen.
The order was written, and that they would establish a camp. Colonel Bradshaw had asked me to help, and with Milton Beckwith and myself and Colonel Bradshaw, we reconnoitered the various parts of it. Good enough for a place to have a camp. We did not find any easily, and in the meantime, we heard the Naval Amphibious Scouts were going to leave, and at that time I was at 6th Army headquarters, and they suggested I go back to the island, to Kalo on Ferguson Island, and occupy the area as the Navy left. Well, we had some Army there, as I said, Beckwith was one. And so I went back to the island, as I recall, and we stayed there, and the Navy pulled out. Colonel Bradshaw did come over and talk to the Marine Major, I believe, commanding, and said, it would be nice if you would leave your tents, your kitchen, whatever you can. And I think they were quite relieved they didn't have to haul any of that stuff away. So we took over the camp. And it was determined that that's where we would be. And then we wanted a new dock, and we wanted a new this and new that. And Colonel Bradshaw said, Mayo, we ought to have this. And I said, sir, you're right. And it's too bad the engineers can't be told to build us a new dock and build us a new kitchen. And he said, that's the way to go. So the order was issued that the headquarters engineer of 6th Army would see that a new dock was built. And it wasn't anything big, but we didn't have to requisition piling, and we didn't have to requisition cement for a new kitchen floor and things like that. It was done in a way it was should be done. Those guys were equipped to do it, and they did it. So we set up camp, and as I recall, we spent Christmas of '43 in that camp. having no TOE or no table organization and equipment, it made it a little funny because I could get for the school what was available. I didn't have to say I had authority to get it, except General Kruger's letter that set up us. So I would go and try to get some rubber boats, and I had to get 6 of them. And they'd say, well, you know, they were Air Corps emergency use boats and things like that. And I'd say, well, we need this for training because we're going to rescue your men. And so I had to always have a good story. And one of the best stories I had was up on Luzon much later, where we needed a water tank. And we'd always been able to get a well or a spring or something, but they needed a water tank. And I went to a sergeant. I knew he had a water tank, and he said, no, couldn't let me have it because we were a small outfit. And I said, well, I had a bottle of whiskey. And, nope. He said, sir, a bottle of whiskey won't help. So I went to his commanding officer, Captain. I said, Captain, you've got a good sergeant there. I need a water tank badly. I've been ordered to get it. You got one. And I offered your sergeant a bottle of whiskey to give me a tank, and he wouldn't take it. And the captain says, I will. So I got a water tank.
Okay, we're back from the video.
Good stuff, huh?
Good stuff.
That particular interview was done by Dr. John Pardon and John Stewart, I believe, in 1993 in Golden, Colorado.
Yeah, I believe so. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was the first reunion, the Alamo Scouts, that I attended, and boy, talk about being wide-eyed and it's like, wow, I'm right in the thick of this thing. I wasn't in the room when they were interviewing, but they were shuffling people in and out, and unfortunately, they had several technical difficulties, as one can see on the video. But hey, something's better than nothing.
Yeah, it took a lot of work to get that video to look good.
Well, if anybody can do it, Russ, you can.
Thanks.
Some of the pictures that we've, and photographs and documents that we've obtained through the years, you know, God bless Russ and Photoshop and all that stuff to be able to actually bring some of these documents back to life. And that's part of what we do here. Part of the Alamo Scouts Historical Foundation is we're dedicated to finding these documents, preserving them, archiving them, so future generations can see what a marvelous outfit this was. And if you haven't had a chance, be sure to try to get to Norfolk, Virginia to visit the MacArthur Museum, where the Alamo Scouts have a display there as part of the prisoner of war display.
I think that display,
incredible.
I think that show ends in May, I believe.
Oh, was it? I thought for some reason it was September, but
yeah, it could be August. I have to look it up.
You know, it could be January, Russ. Between you and I, we don't know anything.
We don't know anything. Yeah, I think it's like May or June or something like that. But I can put it in the description when it ends. You know. Yeah.
So, but if you haven't had a chance to get there and see
absolutely.
It's probably more Alamos. Actually, it is more Alamo Scouts memorabilia than any place else in the country.
Yeah.
Oh,
absolutely.
World, for that matter, including my basement.
Yeah.
So Mayo was really at the heart of the camp when you're talking about the logistics side and the physical side. I mean, he said, I got General Kruger to bring the engineers in and make us a concrete floor in the chow hall, and it was all screened in with anti-mosquito measures. He said we had volleyball nets, which was part of the program, not only to keep the guys happy, but to instill a sense of competition. So that was an ongoing thing, was playing volleyball, believe it or not. They wanted these guys that they were going to bring in to be really at the top of the tip of the spear, rather, aggressive and motivated and competitive, but still able to fit the mission requirements, and that.
Yeah, even the food was better than regular Army there.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean, my father used to always say, the food was great, you know.
Well, you know, who was it? Napoleon said a army runs on its stomach.
Yeah.
Well, the one I was in, we ran on our feet, but the stomach was was right up there. If you keep a soldier fed, that's half the battle there. And,
so let's describe the interview process, how they select candidates to be picked for the Alamo Scout Training Center.
Well, and you know, and I'm going to preface this, Russ, like everything, we like to put things in a nice little box, like, hey, this is the way it was, and it wasn't any different. And no. Originally, it started out where Bradshaw was doing the original interviews. So he would go, a letter went out to, well, you know what? I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up a little bit. For the first class was a little different. The first class consisted mostly of people from the 1st Cavalry Division and the 158th Infantry. So really, there weren't many people outside of those units who were selected. And some of the selectees were cadre. McGowan and Thompson and others were actually going through the school as students and as trainers. So they were pretty accomplished at what they did. But normally, if you're going to pick a norm, is a letter was sent out to each of the divisions within 6th Army requesting X number of names. And they had to be volunteers. So they would say, we need 100 candidates. So the letters went out to the division, and the division would send them down to the regiment, and the regiment to the battalion to the company, on until they had a number of candidates.
Yeah, they were actually posted on a board at the camp.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because I remember a lot of scouts would say, yeah, I was going by and I saw the board, and there it was, looking for, scouts, Army scouts to do behind the line missions.
To piggyback on what you just said, I had some guys said, I didn't volunteer for anything. I was voluntold. And so I think a few of the guys, particularly later in the classes, if the commander wanted to get rid of a certain guy, they just say, you know what? I think you need to volunteer for this, or I've voluntold you for this. So
right, you're right.
On through the company level. And what would happen, Bradshaw in the first class or so, he would do the majority of the interviewing. Well, later on, Homer Williams and some of the more experienced scouts or trainers would do some of the interviewing, especially in areas when, like when they got into the Philippines and the 6th Army units were spread out all over the place. So they would just send bodies out. But effectively, Bradshaw had a technique. He would bring the men in. They would come in and, salute, Private Joe Blow reporting for interview, sir. And he would say, so, why do you want to join this unit? Well, a lot of these guys didn't even know what they were joining. They just wanted to get out of the routine Army, the bad food, the discipline, the boredom. For those of you who've been in the military, hurry up and wait is real. I mean, it would get you. You just...
Yeah, my father was on 3 D-Day type, beach landings where a lot of his men were, killed, injured. And he said, I got to get out of this.
Mm-hmm.
So when he saw it posted looking for scouts, he volunteered.
Sure.
Luckily he made it through and stayed in the scouts all the way to the end of the war.
And I think that really is at the heart of any special forces type soldier, is that they didn't really fit into the norm in their makeup. They didn't want to just fit into just being part of the rank and file. The boredom and the repetition was boring and repetitious. Repetitious. So, I think that mystery appealed to these guys, like it did the early airborne units. They were, hey, I want to jump out of planes for an extra $16 a month. Sign me up. I think that appealed. Like, wonder what this is about. And some of it was they didn't get along with their superiors. So you know what? I'm going to get out of this unit. I don't like, a bunch of idiots here, whatever. It just didn't jive. Yeah. So they would go in and Bradshaw might say, what do you want to do? Well, one of the big responses was, I want to kill Japs, sir. Well, that they were done. That disqualified him right there. Because the unit, as we all know, was to go behind enemy lines to sneak and peek and be stealthy and get in and get out without being detected. Well, they didn't want somebody whose brother's cousin's girlfriend's dad or something had been killed at Guadalcanal, and then they were hell-bent on getting revenge.
Yeah, see, later on, they had a selection where they sat around and a whole bunch of them played cards, and they watched them.
Well, that was part of it. Actually, Russ,
was part of it.
From the very first camp.
Right, exactly.
So what they would do ordinarily, once a guy came in, let's say he was accepted for training. Now, the first class, again, we only had 44 candidates, 38 enlisted, and 6 officers, and most of those were retained, except one guy who kind of, lost his mind. But beyond that, they would come in, they would have a physical, be fed, and then that first night they would put them in a tent. We have a great shot of that too, kind of the day room.
Yeah, right.
And
we'll put it up.
They were, they would be watching them. They wanted to, like Bradshaw had written, they wanted to seek out the loudmouth and the bully and the blowhard, and they wanted people who could be engaging, who could be competitive, who could be civil, not lose their mind. Of course, they had to have a little alcohol there or whatever, because, nothing brings out the true character of a lot of people like a drink or two.
Absolutely.
So they were already being tested from the moment they got there. And a number of scouts told me, they said, hey, you know what? There'd be some guys, playing checkers, and he was just screaming and cards, I beat you, da, 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 da. And the next morning he was gone. I said, hey, we don't need you anymore.
Yeah.
So that was another test that Bradshaw used. And remember, he was an attorney, so he had a few tricks up his sleeve too.
So the first interview you got, you basically went into a tent or a room, and you had to basically select. You were interviewed, and as you were walking out, they would stop you and then ask you what was on my desk or on the table, and you had to answer that question. We have an audio tape of that. Let's play that.
All right.
The division sent us 100 men, and we'd interview those 100 after the division had interviewed them and such. The first interviews by the company, and then by the battalion, and then the regiment, and then by the division. And we were down, and they had 100 men, and we would, from those 100, we'd interview them and select 24, plus enough officers, plus 4 or 5 officers. And then another division would do the same thing, and we'd have 48 scouts and maybe 8 or 10 officers. That's where we got them originally. That's the way we got them all the way through. Well, we'd interview them in one day. Well, yeah, we had a program which was pretty well. One of the things we did is we'd have a table there, and of course we'd sit and front of, and they'd sit on the other side, and on the table would be maybe 20 or 30 items, like a box of matches, and a pack of cigarettes, and a lighter, and a comb, and a knife, and everything you could think of that normal people would normally carry. A watch might be there, and then after the interview was over, we'd walk them to the door, and when their back was turned to the table, we'd ask them how many items they could mention the name on the table. And some of them would answer, would have noticed all of them or most of them, and some would not have noticed any of them. And of course, those that didn't notice anything, we marked on our sheet, and they were eliminated by say right then.
Well, I hope you enjoyed the audio clip that kind of has some insights of how the selection was done and everything.
Yeah, that's pretty innovative. I asked myself, I can't even remember where my keys are. I can't remember where my coffee cup is half the time. I think named 15 or 20 items on a tray. And incidentally, and I want to add this before we take a short break from our sponsor, that the Native American candidates did exceptionally well on this, I was told by many of the scouts, because their visual memory was so acute.
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought that was an interesting point. But
wow.
That because of not being so much into the written word and such, and being outdoors a lot, having that good that visual memory, and it sure paid off, as we'll get into when we talk about some of the Native Americans on the teams and some of the missions and personalities and such. So, well, hey, Russ, you got to stop me there. Let's take a listen and a watch of our sponsor, Slow Hand Barbecue. Wonderful stuff. Take a look.
Hey, welcome back. We're back here talking about the Alamo Scouts and how they established the Alamo Scout Training Center. So let's continue. How about it, Lance?
Well, Russ, one thing we haven't spoken about yet is
overhead.
Yeah. I mean,
overhead.
Yeah, the money it costs to keep us going.
Yeah,
a different overhead. You're talking about the overhead of the Alamo Scout Training Center. Okay, I got you.
Yeah.
Notice how I kind of slid that in there. What we're talking about is overhead. We're talking about the camp personnel that it really took to operate the camp. And we're talking about cooks and communication guys, medics, because a lot of people getting injured during training and such, a camp doctor. We had boat personnel who maintained the boats, motorcraft, rubber boats that were used in training, which we will allude to later. You had supply personnel. You had Mayo Stunts. He had 2 enlisted men who worked for him in procurement. You had admin people who had to type up the records, and drivers and bakers and candlestick makers and carpenters and all these things. So you really had a complement of anywhere from 20 to 40 people, depending on the class size, and it could even go a little bit larger. And so units would supply these workers or these school troops to the Alamo Scout Training Center, and quite frankly, in many of the instances, some of them were basically cast-offs and found a home with the Scouts. Just like many of the Scouts, they loved the duty of supporting these Scouts, and it made them feel pretty special. And the Scouts could not have done what they did without these people. It's just like going back to high school, Russ. You know, the first person you take care of is that school janitor and the cook. I mean,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we have one here of Frank Fiola. We have an audio recording of him. Let's play it.
You'll enjoy this one, folks. Take a listen.
Yeah, take a listen.
We went to New Caledonia, and I landed in the 52nd Evacuation Hospital. You know, where we're taking care of the wounded and all that. 52nd Evacuation was a hospital unit. All right. And we they teaching us everything. We were taking care of the wounded soldiers and everything. And then I was there for a while. Then we went into Guadalcanal, and we landed there, and we took care of the wounded soldiers that were shot up. And then from the 52nd Evacuation, we went to Woodlark Island. Now, I was overseas 3 years. So when we got to Woodlark Island, and we were there for a while, they told us to fall out. So we fell out, you know. And Captain Canfield, you know who he is. He was the captain. He was the doctor, you know. And they told me to fall out. So I can't understand how we were picked. I think we were picked by Colonel Bradshaw, because he did all the picking. So we didn't know where we were going. But we were asking everybody where me and Captain Canfield were going. We didn't know. So we got on the plane, and we flew to Goodenough Island. When we got to Goodenough Island, we went to headquarters there, and I kept telling the captain, I said, where are we going to go? He says, I don't know. So we told the headquarters, where are we going? They wouldn't tell us. It's a secret. He said, we won't let you know till you get to where you're going. So we got on one of the landing crafts, you know, where the door drops open when you hit the beach. So we got on that. We went to the Pacific Ocean. We hit Ferguson Island. And that's where I found out I'd seen the sign Alamo Scouts Training Center. Boy, I'll tell you, everything was a secret. So that's where I met Homer Williams, the major, and Colonel Bradshaw, and of course Captain Canfield. And they told us what it was all about. I said, well, we went for the frying pan into the fire. So anyway, so we went through the training. I had to go through the Alamo Scouts training. I was a medical technician, but I had to go through the training just like the Scouts did. So after I completed my training, I got a diploma from Omar Williams. You know, I got that diploma. It says there, to whom it may concern, this is certified. That's where I made sergeant. He made me a sergeant after I passed the test. It says, this is certified that Frank A. Fiola, Headquarters, 6th Army, has successfully completed the prescribed course of instructions at the Alamo Scouts Training Center from December 8th, 43 to December 44, December 7th to 44. This certificate is awarded in recognition of his proficiency in all subjects included in the course. Remarks, Alamo Scouts Medical Technician, signed by General Kruger and by H.A. Williams. And that's when I was made my sergeant. And that was from December the 8th, 1943 to December the 7th, 1944. That's how long I was in the Scouts. I was in there more than a year. I was there the first class. I was there with Hobbs and Andy Smith, and that guy Aubrey Hall was there, and Belton was there. You know, all the good guys, man. Hobbs and that other guy, Roundsville. I was in with all. I had the class, boy. I'll tell you, I trained with them guys. Them guys were all good guys. John Dove, and Andy Smith, and there was Hobbs, like I told you.
Okay, we're back. Hope you enjoyed the audio clip. Lance, tell us a little bit about that. Tell us about Frank, because you interviewed him on the phone.
Oh, yeah. I had 2 interviews with Frank, and I had mentioned to you earlier, Russ, off camera, that he's as much Chicago as or more than you are New York with your
Great,
little
thanks.
bit of brogues since you've relocated. You've kind of softened in your New York York accent. But Frank was just a wonderful man to speak with. He is excited. Nobody had talked to him about the Alamo Scouts in 50, 60 years when I found him. And he was so proud, and you can hear it in his voice. He just loved what he did, and he went through the training too. With that first class, he did a lot of the training that the Scouts had to do, and he said...
Well, he actually got a diploma.
He did. And
Yeah.
he was awfully proud of that. And I'm sorry to say, he was going to send us a copy, and we lost him before he got around to it. And but what a character, what a contributor to the Alamo Scouts, as the hundreds of other school troops who passed in and out of those gates in the 6 different camps that were established throughout the war. So hats off to the guys who ran the camp.
Yeah, absolutely. So getting back to the selection of the candidates for the Scouts, I always heard from different Alamo Scouts that when they were actually still with their regular unit, before they actually were selected, after they volunteered for it, they would send them swimming a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So can you kind of elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, I think after the first class, there was a target, there was a benchmark to shoot for. So to get in, to be a candidate, for example, you had to have 20/20 vision. You had to be a good swimmer. You had to pass your PT test. Most of the guys came from combat arms, MOSs. So I think there was a basic baseline of qualifications you had to have to come to the Alamo Scouts.
Right.
So with that being said, after that first class graduated, and then the word started getting out, so you know what, these 2-mile swims were taken. You better be a good swimmer or you're going to wash out. So that was the rubber boat handling and training that they had was, if you've ever done anything in the water, nothing will wear you out like being in the water.
Yeah, to be a scout, you really had to adapt to the water conditions because that's the only way in and out of the islands. You're on a PT boat, you got on a rubber boat, and you go to shore, you had to hide the rubber boat, go back to the PT boat on a rubber boat.
And as I can't wait to get to when the time comes, about sometimes you had to back out into that water under fire.
Oh, yeah.
Like your dad's mission. And we can't wait to talk about the Pagan Island mission. So make sure you stay tuned for that when we go over that. So we'll dedicate an entire show to the Pagan Island mission. And
and we also had one where they lost everything leaving the island.
Absolutely. And I was thinking about that, Russ, when you mentioned it, about the raft of one, they lost everything but I think he said 1 pair of boots and a trench knife.
Right.
So, and again, that's one of those incredible missions too. So
yeah, when they got back to the regular lines, they were fully armed.
After dispatching 33 Japanese, with coconuts and clubs and stuff. So we can't wait to get into some of this other stuff. But,
the missions are great.
But with to put a bow on your question, Russ, about the water and such, I think it filtered down through the units, kind of what the expectation was, and in my research, I found that some of the units wouldn't even send people. They were supposed to, but if they didn't have people who were qualified or they didn't want to send their best people, they say, we're not going to do it.
We got to do it. Yeah.
And that caught a little heat from Kruger and others, but Bradshaw and the other directors, Homer Williams, they would send off letters saying, hey, you know what? We never got X number of men from 6th Infantry Division or yada, 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 and might want to correct that next time, which Kruger usually did, or his G2.
Usually did.
Horton White. Right. So that's kind of where we are. So looking back, kind of things we've covered today is really just the establishment of the camp and the selection process just to get into the training. And those classes, with the exception of the first one, they varied in size. Some, when things are really heating up, like the third class that your father was in, they had 100 candidates. And as the camp was going to be moved, there would be fewer candidates in some of those classes just because of the logistics.
Right.
But then, and for example, the 7th class, we didn't know if there was going to be an invasion of Japan. So in May and June of 45, again, another large class because they were ramping up to say, hey, we might have to invade Japan. So the needs of the Army, Russ, were paramount in this. Also, the forecasted requirements for ongoing or upcoming landings and assaults. How many men do you think we would need? And then the other was the candidates would have peer review. Their own peers would kind of like vote on them if they could be on a team. That was one method, along with the instructor recommendations and observations and grading and such. So there were a few items that really played into the mix. So, I mean, we're looking at candidates who went on to become major generals who were not retained simply because nobody was retained from that specific class.
Right.
They didn't need them. Not that they weren't qualified. It's just they weren't needed at that time. And another thing I guess I'd like to put out there is that sometimes the guys just weren't retained on the teams because they had too many teams to begin with, and they needed people to go back to the regular units and set the standard for reconnaissance at their regimental level or battalion or company level and train those guys, the ones who couldn't go to the Scouts Training Center, and really kind of lift the bottom end up a little bit.
That's one of the things that I get. The emails I get since 1999 about why isn't my father on the roster? Well, sometimes it's my father's on the roster, but wasn't selected for a team. I don't understand that. And I have to explain, they went back to their regular unit after they graduated, they got a diploma, they went through the training, but they went back to their original unit to scout for them,
And that's not...
It's always been a question, Yeah,
and that really doesn't speak necessarily to the quality of the man. If they graduated the course, I mean, it's like somebody who graduates from the Special Forces Q course and they get tabbed. Well, they're a Green Beret.
Yeah.
They might not have got placed on a team for this reason or the other. But the fact is,
some went back on their own. They decided I didn't want to be on a team. They went back to the regular unit.
And that was an option too. They said, this going behind enemy lines 500 miles, dropped off on a PT boat and row in 400 yards in the dark of night into an enemy-occupied island. Who wouldn't want it? I mean,
Yeah, right.
It took a special kind of guy to do those type of things, like it does today. The tip of every spear is sharp.
Hey, before wrapping this up, we had a few questions that come in. So one of them was, how do you compare the Alamo Scouts with the Rangers of today? Can you give us some insight on that, Lance?
Well, I think that's kind of a tough comparison in some ways. I mean, the Rangers of today are so technically sound, and the weapons and the GPS and the equipment. They're an elite fighting force. But if we go back in time and we're taking apples and oranges, well, they're all fruit. So I think you look at the quality of the men. So to say, okay, I want to compare the Rough Riders of the Spanish-American War with Darby's Rangers of World War II, or the Alamo Scouts, or the Navy SEALs of today. Well, different eras, but still the same kind of mettle of the men who weren't satisfied with the status quo, men who wanted a little bit more, people who had, for one reason or another, greater motivation, no shortage of courage. Although Jack Dove, who was an amazing scout, once told me that he said, Lance, we weren't supermen. People like to make us out as supermen, but we weren't. It's just we had this desire to go the extra mile, to stick to things, to work through being uncomfortable and in misery and in danger because somebody had to do it. And I think at the end of the day, when you compare any special force unit, special forces type or elite operators, I think that's a common thread that runs through all of them, is their ability to exemplify some of the higher qualities of soldiering and that we see in every unit, whether it's Air Force or Navy or Army, Marines, you name it, in any army across the world. But the difference is you start comparing the equipment and some of the different missions and the training is a little different, but the men are the same.
Yeah.
So there is a long answer to a short question, Russ.
Sure. And then we had some questions about, did the Alamo Scouts ever go to Japan during the war? And no, they haven't. No. Some believe they did. It's a myth.
Well, every person that I spoke to, and some 100 people who either went through training or were in the camps or on operational teams, they went on September 25th, 1945.
Correct.
That was the first, and some of them said we rushed out of that landing craft at port arms with our rifles ready to go. Well, the surrender had already been signed, so they weren't quite sure what to expect, but most of the guys who had occupation duty in Japan with the Scouts, they were busy holding down, kabuki bars and trying not to
actually
get arrested.
They were treated. What they told me, they were treated very nicely by the Japanese people when they got there.
Yes.
Okay, that'll about wrap it up. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments section. And don't forget to visit alamoscouts.org for more information about the Alamo Scouts. We'll be back with episode 3 in the coming weeks. And be sure to tune in. I want to thank Lance Zedric. Zedric, you want to say goodbye? Till next time.
All right, Russ. And just to add to that, this next episode, we're going to be talking about the training of the Alamo Scouts and leading up to their selection and coming quickly. We'll start on the missions.
All right. Well, thanks for dropping in and listening to us. We'll catch you on the next one.
All right. See you next time, guys.
See ya.